funeral director at Kent Funeral Home in Southfield, and attorney Keith Sims, who specializes in a lot of wills and trusts, probate, that kind of thing. Two very, very wonderful gentlemen who are always great guests on our show. Moving right along to this segment, the past 2020 is a very strange year. 2020, we will always remember this year, the pandemic, so many other things. And the pandemic has changed the way all of us live. COVID-19 has changed everything. Our lives have been topsy-turvy. The children couldn't go to school. He else could not go to work. I'm sitting at home doing my radio show right now. At home, yes, remotely, not in the studio, because we're not allowed to go in. It's the same with many network news shows that you watch on television. They're doing shows from various locations, not in the studios, all to protect us. And then we have on top of that, if that's not bad enough, if that's not enough to deal with, we have had police shooting after police shooting after police shooting. Not that it just started, because there have been too many already. But now it almost seems like back to back. But something different happened. Something different happened. Even during a pandemic, citizens were so upset that they took to the streets. Not only in the cities where cops murdered Black men in cold blood in real time on camera. We witnessed that. Not only were the protests just in those cities, but in other cities across America and in countries across the world. In countries across the world, people were protesting because it was a breaking point. I call it a breaking point. How much can you take? I'm not a big political commentator, but I'm a human being, and I'm a citizen, and I'm a mother of a Black man, and the mother of a Black grandson and a son, and I have Black male friends. I'm a Black woman who's connected to Black men, and I hate what is happening. It just hurts me. It just hurts me so much to see what is happening. So instead of me talking about this tonight, I want to talk to a very wonderful guy, Michael Imhotep. He's a host of his own show here on 910, but I contacted him today and I said, would you like to just come on and co-host with me tonight on this 10 o'clock hour? And of course, Michael is the founder of the African History Network. He's a lecturer. He's a researcher. I always call him the scholar. I mean, he's one of the smartest guys I know. He knows so much history. Michael, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Charlene, thanks for having me back again. How you doing tonight?
Look here, I'm full. I'm full right now.
Right.
I'm really full. There's so much going on. What do you make of the past few weeks, especially in light of the murder of George Floyd, and now Rayshard Brooks?
Right.
And these two things happened even before George Floyd was buried. Here's another incident at the Wendy's, and what the heck? I mean, you would think that policemen, police officers, in light of that worldwide publicity of what had just happened, I've never seen publicity like that, nonstop, 24/7, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. Everybody was covering it.
Right.
But they would still go out and behave this way? Come on.
Well, what we have to understand is that we have a convergence, a confluence of a number of different things. George Floyd was a tipping point for a few different reasons. Number one, you had COVID-19, so you had about 40 million people unemployed. So they had more time to watch and become engaged in what's taking place. Number two, you had the killings of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. The killing of Breonna Taylor. This is leading up to George Floyd. And then you have the video of George Floyd showing him horrifically being murdered. Okay, no humanity shown to him. So because you have a number of different things taking place at the same time, you have 40 million plus people unemployed. You have COVID-19 exposing the racial inequities in American society, lack of health care, poverty, all different types of things like this. And then you have on top of that, police brutality, and then dealing with a history of police brutality, understanding systemic racism, one, and people like to talk about racism, but people like to talk about systemic racism, but racism in general is systemic. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. And then on top of that, when you have the two-year-old toddler in the White House who keeps throwing Twitter tantrums, okay, all this is coming together all at the same time. So this is what's taking place, and it reached a tipping point, and you saw protests all around the world behind the killing of George Floyd, and not just that, we see that we're seeing police reform taking place in various ways, local level, state level. We see that Democrats in the House of Representatives come out with their police reform bill. We see a very tepid one from the U.S. Senate. We see a very weak executive order from Donald Trump. So all this is taking place at the same time. And we're about 4.5 months out from a presidential election as well. Probably the biggest, most important election in probably in the history of this, in our lives. OK. So all this is taking place at the same time.
And what I want to segue and have you talk about your predictions for this GOP convention that's going to take place in Tulsa the day after Juneteenth. Okay, the day after. He was trying to change it from Juneteenth.
Right.
He said today, nobody really knew what Juneteenth was until I told them.
Well, not only that, nobody knew who Frederick Douglass was until he started talking about Frederick Douglass. Well, nobody. Well, first of all, it's a couple of things. It's a good chance. Well, so it's not just on Juneteenth, and he's done addresses in the past to acknowledge Juneteenth. It's not just Juneteenth, but it's also in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we know we just commemorated the 99th anniversary of the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was June 1st, 1921, right? June 1st, 1921. So it's probably to galvanize and to trigger his base, because he's in deep trouble even before the excerpts of the book from John Bolton leaked out, before that even came out. So he's in deep trouble. So he's trying to galvanize his base. So when we look at what's taking place, we see NASCAR's turning on him. NASCAR's prohibiting the Confederate battle flag. Who thought
they would ban the Confederate flag?
Right.
And
it's important for people to understand is that red flag with the blue St. Andrew's cross and the white stars. That's not the Confederate flag. That's the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. There were 3 Confederate flags that flew over the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. That flag that's on the General Lee car on the Dukes of Hazzard, General Lee, named after General Robert E. Lee, that flag was not the official. That's not one of the official Confederate flags. It's been adopted by a lot of white supremacists, and it's become part of a lot of Southern culture because of what's called this whole lost cause initiative to reinterpret the history of the Confederacy as that fighting for states' rights and the Union trying to tell them what to do, as opposed to these states seceding from the Union because they wanted to maintain slavery. Because when you read their statements of secession, they talk about how slavery was central to their way of life. Okay, so you have that, and then also it's not just NASCAR. You have the NFL, Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, coming out saying that the NFL was wrong in their stance on players taking a knee. Go ahead.
My question is for you.
Go ahead.
What do you make of what he said back then and what he's saying now?
Oh, you talking about Trump or Goodell?
Goodell first.
Well, the tide is shifting. See, the tide is shifting, and with all this taking place, the NFL and 70% of the players are African American men. So that's their product. They don't want to be on the wrong side of history because this whole tide is shifting. So what George Floyd did with the murder of George Floyd, this really caused people who didn't already know it to realize Colin Kaepernick was correct for taking a knee. That's why I have my Colin Kaepernick shirt on tonight. Because I was one of the first ones. I was one of the first ones.
I know you were.
Yeah, I was one of the first ones to really talk about Colin Kaepernick and support him. And I've done lectures dealing with his protests and what's all behind it and things like this, and dealing with the history of the defense of Fort McHenry, which is what the Star Spangled Banner was originally called when it was written by Francis Scott Key, September 13th, 1814, during the War of 1812. All right. So the NFL does not want to be on the wrong side of history. And it's also important to understand that you have some of these NFL owners who are Trump supporters and donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to Donald Trump's campaign. Jerry Jones, right?
Cowboys.
Yeah. So love
the Cowboys. So black folks love the Cowboys.
You said black folks love the Cowboys.
He's saying, he says if his players do that, they won't play. Well, if they don't play,
right? He did say that. But see, they're going to have to take a different. They're going to have to take a different stance now.
All of them say we're not going to play. See, somebody's got the whole, I don't want to say that word, the card, okay? Somebody's going to, and it might not be him. He might be going out on a limb saying, well, if somebody does this, they won't play. They won't. Well, enough of them do it. They won't play, or if they play, they'll lose.
Well, here's the thing. The NFL doesn't want to be on the wrong side of history. These allies of Trump are being forced to be on the right side of history. And then Trump comes out, I think it was today, and says that Colin Kaepernick deserves a second shot in the NFL.
And wait a minute, because I was glad that I was seated when I read that I was sitting down, because I'm like, didn't you call them SOB?
Yeah, he did. But see,
and do this and do that. And there's video of him screaming, "You're fired! Don't you want
right.
these SOB?"
But Charlene,
he deserves to. Charlene, if he's in shape and if he can still throw the ball, and if, but he knows somebody told him you better, because you're losing votes.
Right. Well, see, this is an election year. You haven't,
and he'll probably backtrack on that.
Well, here's the thing.
Or clarify that, or
you have a November 3rd, 2020 election. There was a poll that came out from CNN that shows Joe Biden ahead of Trump by 14 points. Trump has one of his attorneys contact CNN and threatens to sue them if they don't retract the poll, because Trump says the poll is wrong. No, it's not. See, all this is taking place at the same time, and he's scared.
Like what the news media says, or a poll, he's going to sue them, and he wants them to get on there and retract it. Who does he think he is?
He thinks he's a dictator. This is the whole problem. He thinks he's a dictator.
You can't handle the truth.
He thinks he's a dictator. And see, what a lot of people are realizing, even people around him are realizing, the tricks that he used in 2016, a lot of stuff is not going to work now, because people have seen his track record. You have another 1.5 million people that came out today from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Another 1.5 million people applied for unemployment last week. 46 million people in 13 weeks have applied for unemployment. Now, can't no brother lose 46 million jobs in 13 weeks and still have a job. That ain't going to happen. See, so
right.
So you have all this taking place, and because so many people are unemployed and at home, they have time to pay attention to all this, right? And now, we see. Go ahead.
Are watching, because one of the things that I do with my public relations firm, advertising firm, is that I place airtime for clients that I have. I produce commercials, I buy the airtime, and I'm looking at the numbers. And they buy a lot of CNN, MSNBC, and even a little bit of Fox News, not much, but because they're the people that are going to do business with them don't watch Fox. So anyway, but the numbers are so high now with news viewing because people are watching the news. Yeah, they're still watching Family Feud because you need a break from the news, and things like that. But people are watching more news than ever before.
Right,
and
watching the news.
Those networks are getting such big numbers because, like you said, there are people with more leisure time, and they want to know what's going on because we're all kind of living on the edge right now.
Right.
And even people who say, "Oh, I'm just dealing with it. I don't care." Yeah, you care because we're caring about our damn health. Number one,
right,
with the pandemic, and we're trying to, wear a mask and worrying about who doesn't have on a mask and where we go and all of that. We have families, we want to be well, but then we got protesters in the streets, and when people get really mad, I think some people just, forgot that hey, it's a protest, but we should still have on our mask.
Well,
I'm hoping
and spikes. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a spike in 21, 22 states. Especially a lot of those states that have Republican governors. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that these states open back up too soon. And we're seeing a spike in
Florida.
DeSantis in Florida. We see Alabama, Arizona. Absolutely.
Yeah, because they did what Trump asked them to do.
Exactly. So all this is going to come back and bite him in the behind. And let me tell you, in Tulsa right now, you have people waiting in line 3-4 days early for that Trump rally. That is going to be a super spreader.
Breathing on each other.
That's going to be a super spreader.
Saliva on each other, hugging. They're shoulder to shoulder. They might catch it before they even get in the room.
And many of them not wearing masks. Now they're going to give out sanitizers. They're going to give out masks, but a lot of them won't wear masks, and Trump won't do it either.
Well, if they get it, it's bad. But I'm not a terrible person. I don't want them to get it because I don't want them taking it back to their states. We're taking it back to their families. We're taking it to me.
Right. Well, some people feel that way. Yeah.
Around me is going to the
exactly. Let me just say this very quickly. I know we're coming up on the break. Let me just say this very quickly. I know we're coming up on the break here. 2016. Some people say the polls were wrong in 2016. No, they weren't wrong. The polls predicted Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote between 2% to 4%. She won the popular vote. What's hard to predict is the break of the Electoral College, the path to 270. And the other thing that was hard to predict in 2016 is the depth of voter suppression. OK, so there was rampant voter suppression in 2016. And also 2016 was the first presidential election in 50 years where you did not have the full power of the 1965 Voting Rights Act because Section 4 had been gutted because of the U.S. Supreme Court case of Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. So that was a different race. We shouldn't take any votes for granted. I'm not saying relax anything like that. No, but 2016 was a different race.
Yeah, but we're going to go ahead and take that break.
Yeah.
And when we come back, I'm going to ask you about your predictions, what this convention is going to do, we know that the people who attended are going to keep supporting Trump no matter what. They don't care.
Right.
But what about those of us who are watching it from afar, watching it on our television sets? Are some Trump supporters decent white folks, decent GOP folks? Are they going to say, something, can't support him this time? Do you think that's going to happen? I'm going to ask you when we come back, and joining us will be the chairman of the Michigan Black Caucus, Keith Williams. He'll be chiming in
Keith
as well. Yeah. So, Michael Imhotep, please stay with us. Keith Williams will join us when we come back.
Okay.
Stay tuned to Mind Your Business with Charlene Mitchell. We'll be right back.
I am Michael Garrett, CEO of CNS Healthcare. CNS Healthcare has been serving Southeastern Michigan for over 17 years. We are happy to announce our newest youth services clinic, which is conveniently located at Joy Road in Greenfield. CNS Youth Services devotes treatment to children ages 7 to 17. CNS Youth Services specializes in treatments for depression,
co-hosting
anxiety,
the Mind Your Business
and other mental health needs.
Radio show on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF.
CNS Youth Services, you will always experience a warm and caring environment.
So
as well
she's
as
on Thursdays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Thursday on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation
school-based support, and more.
So she asked me to do
healthcare providers offering crucial services in the community to our patients regardless of their insurance status. For more information and to schedule
Now, some
an
people
appointment,
say ignorant things like the Clintons locked more minorities up than any other
8611.
president. The 94 crime bill was federal law, not state law. 87% of the people that went to
The
prison
demand for justice is
went under
ringing
state
out
law,
from our
not
streets.
federal law. So you should really
We
do
know
more
that's how
research.
movements
That's
start.
false.
From the
This is
labor movement
ridiculous.
to the civil rights
And
movement,
you should go
Detroit
back and
Wayne
study
County
Richard Nixon's
neighborhoods
war
have
on
led the
drugs
nation when change is
that
needed.
started June 17, 1971.
Today is no different. People are in the streets demanding justice and equality for
Because
Black
that's
lives
where the
and
war
for
on
the
drugs
victims of
started. And the U.S.
COVID-19.
prison population quadrupled
People
from
want leadership
1970
that
to
listens to them
1993.
and answers their
Crime
needs.
bill wasn't signed on September 13,
Every day, it is an honor
1994.
to fight for our district, to show up for our families who just want the opportunity to
Okay,
thrive.
Max,
I go
you're
to
another
DC to
troll.
fight for our
You
community
should do
and
more
bring the needs
research.
of our neighbors
That was
to the
federal
halls
law,
of
not
Congress.
state law. If you don't know the difference,
We are in a time that
then you're
calls
on the
for
wrong
justice
page.
and the truth, and I'm committed to being your partner in this fight.
See, states had already
I'm
started
Rashida
passing
Tlaib,
longer, harsher
running for
sentences in the
re-election to Congress, and I
1970s,
approve
80s, and
this
early
message.
90s.
Paid for by Rashida Tlaib for
Let me see
Congress.
something here.
COVID-19 has changed everything. At Amada Senior Care, health and safety is our number one concern. Amada is a 5-star
try to
rated
kill the
in-home health care.
All right, is that better? Let me see. All right, is that better? 3 strikes was federal law. 3 strikes don't apply to everybody. If you're gonna post here, you should go do some research, Cornelius. 3 strikes was federal law. 3 strikes existed in California as state law before it was incorporated into the 94 crime bill. 3 strikes didn't apply to everybody, even if they had 3 major crimes, is if they committed federal crime. See, we don't understand law. This is part of the problem. I read all these Simple Simon ass comments. I could tell people don't understand law. Most people don't even understand the crime bill because they haven't gone and researched it. If you go back and watch my April 26th broadcast, I break down the crime bill because there were positive things and negative things in the crime bill. One of the things that people don't know is the 94 crime bill gave the Department of Justice the power to investigate the patterns and practices of police departments. That was used under the Obama administration more than any previous administration. The Trump administration has backed off of investigating police departments, the patterns and practices, and putting them and entering into consent decrees. They backed off of this. You watch my Sunday night show, man, because I listen to what people say. You repeating bullshit that you hear from other people. You got to go research this stuff. This is why I said 5 weeks ago on my show, I'm listening to Charlemagne the guy. He doesn't understand politics. I'm listening to what Charlemagne says. He doesn't understand politics. You have to go research law and history. And you can't start with the 94. When people come to me and start talking about the 94 crime bill and you skip over Richard Nixon's war on drugs, that means you don't understand history. All right, we're coming back.
It's time for Mind Your Business with Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist Charlene Mitchell.
And we are back here on Mind Your Business. I'm your host, Charlene Mitchell. We're having a very exciting discussion tonight about the state of Black America, the state of Black Michigan, the state of Black Detroit. My co-host tonight is Michael Imhotep.
Yes.
He is the host of his own show here on 9 10 a.m. on Sunday evenings. Michael,
9 p.m. Sundays, 9 p.m. The African History Network show.
Tonight. And tell us about your show. Promote your show right now.
Okay, so I'm on every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network show. I celebrated 4 years, April 2020 was 4 years on 9 10 a.m. the Superstation. So we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. We don't just deal with history and African-American history, things like that, but we deal with current events, economics, politics, education, and issues pertaining to the African-American community. And people can also follow me on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, where we have a little over 1 million followers, The African History Network, and also on YouTube, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. Well,
you said it. I couldn't have said all that. You are just, what do I always call you? And I'm glad you said you celebrated 4 years in April. I celebrated 4 years in January. Mm-hmm. I think we might be the old folks at 910, okay?
Right.
We've been here since the beginning.
Right.
And we're still here, and we're still bringing good information. Joining us now is Chairman of the Michigan Black Caucus, Keith Williams. Are you with us, Keith?
Hey, Keith, how you doing? Yeah, Keith and I, we're both we're friends.
I'm so glad that we wanted to bring you in tonight because, you know, you have your finger on the pulse of so many things. You know, you're active. You never stop. You never stop. You are, you know, giving information and trying to teach people, and you're just relentless in your effort to try to get Black folks to do the right thing, as Spike Lee would say. And sometimes I know I feel your frustration when I see your post on Facebook, that you're so frustrated that it's like you're trying to get a point across that people are not always listening at the level that you would want them to listen. How would you describe where we are now, just a little bit on a national scale, and bring it down to how that affects Michigan and Detroit?
You know, thanks for having me on the show, Michael and Charlie. I know this is a show. I think we had a sad moment, but we had a hopeful moment. And it took one young man to lose his life to reinvigorate Black America. But you know, there are some things in the city throughout the metro region that Black folks got to come get together on Black leadership. And what is Black leadership? You know, we got Detroit, we got Southfield, Oak Park, and all three of those cities are majority cities, and they're led by white men. And I'm not mad at them. Okay, the two white men and a Black and a white woman. I'm not mad at them, but I'm mad at Black leadership because we can't get together and try to move a Black agenda forward so we can help all Black folks in this community. Yes, it's sad, but it's hopeful. And the hopeful part is young folks are now taking a leadership role and try to read and reconstruct what has happened in America. And I'm hopeful from that standpoint.
Well, you know, you just mentioned the cities of Southfield, Oak Park, and you named another jurisdiction. Well, Detroit, of course. With majority, minority, what they call it, majority cities that have white mayors. Detroit has a white mayor. Southfield has a white mayor. We got Duggan Consider, and there's a woman mayor who is white in Oak Park. Oak Park has never had a Black mayor. Southfield, of course, had a Black mayor, Brenda Lawrence. She's now in Congress. She moved up, but she was not replaced by another Black person. Okay. In Detroit, who can explain that? You know, he's in his second term, and he's doing, you know, everything possible, I think, to remain mayor, to be reelected for a third term if he decides to run. He's doing a Juneteenth celebration. He's doing all kinds of stuff. He's taking down statues. We're doing all that kind of stuff. Keith, what does that mean?
You know,
is that just something to get Black folks to say, "Ooh, he did that. Isn't that good?" Or do you think he's sincere? Does he understand our cause?
You know, he's a politician. I'm not mad at him. I'm just mad at Black folks because we keep allowing things like this to happen. You know, yeah, you got you taking down statue Christopher Columbus, but then, Charlene, it's 11 streets that is named after slave owners that should come down too, like Cass Avenue, John R. Brush Street, Joseph Copple, Macomb Street, Bovian.
You would have to rename the whole damn city. Cass alumni would be upset if you took the name Cass and changed it to something else.
But Charlene, if they could take down forts now after the Confederate soldiers, then why can't they come to Detroit and start cleaning house? If we're going to be straight about this, let's clean house. Let's clean house on all places. We're getting rid of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and all those many connotations that has been associated with Black people. It's all
you know something, and I did a post today, and I just said, I'm personally am more concerned with police brutality than whose face is on the pancake mix box.
Hey, I'll be right back, Charlene. I'll be right back.
Her face has been on the pancake mix box for 100 years. I bought Aunt Jemima pancakes. I don't buy the syrup, not because I don't like her, because I buy pure maple syrup. And I buy Biscuit because I make my pancakes with Biscuit. But, you know, and Uncle Ben's rice, before I knew how to make real rice, I bought Uncle Ben's rice because I bought it because there was a black face on it. I bought cream of wheat and still buy it. But I'm going to tell you guys something. Here's a little secret. Go to your Kroger or your local store tomorrow. Buy one of each. It's going to be a collector's item. Collector's item. And because you won't be able to find them. Whatever is out there now is out there. They're stopping it. They're changing it. And just like all the other artifacts, Michael, you know this.
All right, I'm back.
Black folks have, white people own all this stuff, the advertisements for slaves and all kinds of stuff, and they're now antiques. They're worth a lot of money. Hey, go get you some Aunt Jemima pancake mix, the syrup, Uncle Ben's, and the cream of wheat. You know, white folks bought it because they said it must be good because black folks can cook. You know, so I don't care about whose faces are on that. I care. That's to me another distraction. That's my opinion. It's another.
Charlene.
We weren't upset about it until today. Yesterday, we all of a sudden, Aunt Jemima. You know, come on.
Go ahead, Keith, and then I'll comment.
We fuel it.
One at a time. Keith, go ahead.
Okay. Black folks has always fueled white wealth. Okay, with stuff like Aunt Jemima and things like that. We control our own destiny. We spend a lot of money on clothes, cars, and all those things that we're going to take a call. We're going to take a call. James is on the line. James, thank you so much for calling. You're on Mind Your Business. What's your question or comment, sir?
Yes, I listened to the brother program about the history. He's real good on how you put the history out.
Thank you.
But I want to say that yes, you are. I'm going to say all that Confederate stuff, that's supposed to go. It has nothing to do with America, period. Right. They know that. They do it. You got it in the Capitol, United States Capitol building. That's the Confederate flag. It's like what ISIS flag. It has no business doing that, and they know this.
Those were the traitors to the Union.
You know, but what I'm trying to say is that for black folks, we need to know how to. The man is right. We need to know how we watch how we spend our money. We are wasteful spenders of our money, black folks, and we have to vote. We definitely need to vote. And all that. For example, you said the Aunt Jemima stuff and all like that, but I'm glad this awareness has come. This brother sacrificed his life. He didn't even know he would. George, he sacrificed his life. I think his family, I think his kids, because this is an awakening. And you know what? There is going to be police change. It's going to be federal, and it's going to go federal to state, because the police has no right to call immunity if you do something wrong. Are they serious? That if I'm a police officer, I can walk up to you and do anything I want to do to you, and then what I might be off from work or with pay or whatever. These videos have set a whole new precedent, because the people, you take the cops know who they are, from the higher level to the lower level. They spend in their training investigating crimes. You don't see no crimes in your precincts. You don't see no crimes in law. I couldn't fill out an application and say, if it says, if I see my coworker doing something wrong or stealing, I'm supposed to say that. Okay? If I say no, you think I would have that job? Yeah, that's a heck of a job. Some people are not the police. Being a police officer, some people, that's not certain jobs for certain people. Just like Donald Trump, this is not his job as president. He needs to go back to selling real estate, because America is at a record.
I agree with that. And
these young folks are not going to stop.
You have made so many great points. We are short on time, but I don't want to cut you off, because I could listen to you for the rest of the show. But we have a guest on the line who we got a couple more topics. Thank you so much for calling, and tune in every Thursday night. We hope to educate and bring good information. Michael and Keith, that gentleman just had great points, didn't he?
Let me say this very quickly here. When we talk about
that lets you show his emotion came through. That's what I felt. Not just the words he spoke, but his emotion. He was just so wrapped up in it, as we all are right now, because people are ticked off. We are tired of this mess. We are.
Right.
So what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to take you one at a time. Where do you think the protests are going to take us from here? Will they continue? Will they die out? Will people go back to work and say, well, nothing changed? Or are we going to see anything significant and positive for Black people come from this? Michael?
Well, yeah, we're seeing changes take place already. We see in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we see that the city council announcing that they're disbanding the police department that they've had problems with for years. We're seeing changes take place in the state of New York with Governor Cuomo and executive orders. We see the bill from Democrats in the House of Representatives. There's going to be more from this, and that's going to fuel the protests. Now, they're going to have to keep the intensity of the protests going as more people go back to work. But what this is causing people to really understand is the connection between politics and law and your conditions. Okay, politics impacts every aspect of our life, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat. And politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So people are understanding the relationship between local politics and their conditions, as well as politics in the federal government. And then that's all that's going to lead up to November 3rd, where it's not just the president on the ballot, but is all 435 seats in the House of Representatives. You have a number over 20 seats in the U.S. Senate. OK, and then you have local races. So people are really understanding how all this is connected and how it's impacting their health care, their education, their finances. OK, so it is going to continue.
And what I want to do right now is segue over back to Keith Williams, the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus here in Michigan. Continuing what Michael just said, how it goes down from national to regional to state to local. You're very involved in Michigan as a state, but local politics as well. And we talked earlier this afternoon, and you told me you might have a surprise for me. Now, I don't know what that is, but I was very anxious to hear about it.
Well, the surprise won't happen to 12 o'clock. And so I'll call you around 12. They were still compiling the numbers. And, so I don't want to mention that to the numbers that were compiled. But it's going to be a shock.
The numbers are about what? You don't have the numbers, but it's about a poll, you said.
About a poll on me. You're good, right?
Okay, what is the poll? Can you at least tell me something about what kind of poll this is for Detroit?
There's going to be a poll on the 13th congressional district race between Rashida and Brenda Jones.
Oh, really? But we don't have the.
I don't have the numbers yet, but wasn't there another poll as well? I don't want to talk about that one. Okay, I don't want to mention that. And I just want to keep.
We're not going to blow anything here on my show. We'll wait till you're ready to talk about it. But I'm on once a week, so if it comes up this week tomorrow, then I won't have the scoop.
Yeah, but I'll let you.
I got it. But I won't be on the air until next Thursday. How do you think? Just let me tell you, we'll get away from that for a minute because we don't have the poll results. How is what's happening nationally trickling down into Detroit? Keith Williams.
I'm going to say this. Can I say this? I want to say this. We ought to thank Comey Young for what he did to Detroit when he started bringing black police chiefs. See, we don't have that problem nationally because you got Sheriff Benny Napoli, who was chief of police, now Sheriff Wayne County. You got Chief Craig. And if you look at all the black police chiefs we have, they come from the city, they were born and raised in the city, and they're in tune to the city. Yeah, we may have a little skirmishes every now and then, But we don't have that issue. What
we did not have in Detroit the riots and the looting and the burning down of buildings and the killings like they had in cities across the United States. Detroit, I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, Detroit's going to have that. Detroit did not have that. Detroit did not have that because of leadership.
Because leadership. But let me also say that
the county sheriff.
Yeah. I work with the Sheriff Benny Napoli. I'm director of recruiting, and this is the problem. I've gone to schools throughout Metro Detroit. Black kids do not want to be police officers. And so we're leaving those jobs to folks that don't look like us. Okay? I'm going to tell you, I have gone to a couple of schools, and a kid called me ops. He said, here come the ops. And so I said, what does ops mean? It means opposition. See, we can be a part of the solution. We can be part of the problem. And so I'm telling these kids, 18 years old, they start off with $35,000, 401k, tuition reimbursement, a career pathway. It's not about a job. It's about a career. If we can change a whole lot of this stuff, if we just put something.
And Keith, you're talking about Wayne County Sheriffs, right? So let people know.
Because I know Keith is recruiting now for Wayne County Sheriff's deputies, for people to join that force. I think some cadets have just come through with Wayne County. But the problem has been salary. These people go out every day with a gun and a badge, and they come against some bad people. You know, they don't know what they're being called to. I understand, police, you go to a door and you knock on it, you don't know what's behind that door. And if you're being paid $28,000 a year or $30,000, it ain't worth it. It ain't worth it.
All you got to do is
$35,000 is just not worth it. Teachers and police officers are the lowest paid people who we really need. The most important people, law enforcement and educators. Why does everybody else make more money than them?
But you know what's got to happen? It's the way we fund our school system and our first responders. We fund them through taxes based on the housing and all that other stuff.
Property taxes.
Finance got to change. Property tax.
Michael, what would you say to that? The way that school systems basically are based on taxes.
Right.
I will say, you know, I'm not ashamed to say.
That's a form of discrimination. That's a form of discrimination. It's like on purpose.
And our schools, you know, have everything that a child needs. My kids, my grandkids both went through, you know, schools in West Bloomfield. They get everything. I mean, in the first grade, they get a Chromebook. They get to keep it all year. You know, they get to keep it during summer. They have an advantage. I pay a lot of taxes, but Detroiters pay a lot of taxes. Detroiters pay a lot of taxes. I think every school should be equal, regardless of the income or the value of a home or any of that. And that's not the system that we have. And that's why we have an unequal education system. That is absolutely why it's not equal. And it's not right. It's just not right.
You're dealing with a system of white supremacy and racism. It's like that on purpose. Okay, so because I know we ran out of time. Let me say this very quickly. One, I've said this a number of times before. At the end of the day, African Americans are going to have to realize that many of us are going to have to apply to the police department and become the type of officers that we say we want to see. Period. Because if we don't, then who's going to be the police in our communities? Okay. Even though people talk about quote unquote defund the police, and really what we should be saying is reduce responsibilities and reallocate resources, you're still going to have some type of law enforcement. But if we don't apply to the academy and become the police officers we want to see, where are they going to come from? They're going to bring them from outside of our communities, outside of our cities. But we don't want the rednecks, the trigger happy cops. Well, that's why we got to be the officers.
We're inviting them in because we don't apply, and that's why they keep trying. And I think there needs to be. I'm going to do a show on that. We just got to do some recruitment. We have to tell young people this is a career path because not everybody can go to college.
Well, the whole concept of law enforcement has to. Our concept. Women
who can apply to be in law enforcement.
Right, and our whole concept of law enforcement has to change as well. But with the way is depicted a lot of times is wrong, especially because a lot of it comes from what we see on television and the movies and things like that, and most of that is fake. Okay, so and then the other thing is dealing with the funding, the education, and property taxes. This all deals with policy and law, and this deals with federal government, Department of Education, and this is why who you elect for a president, who you elect for U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, all that impacts the Department of Education and financing education. Okay, so the funding for education, so all that is connected.
You know, can I say, so Charlene, when you said about the state of the black, the black folks, I'm looking at this, and I was looking at the Black Panthers, and I went back and started saying, they had a 10-point plan. That 10-point plan is so applicable to this day and age.
Right. But
we cannot, the thing is, what is the black strategy right now? I don't know. We all over the map, okay? But we don't have a strategy that's going to lift educate our folks, bring wealth to our folks, and bring wealth and prosperity, and to educate and to give the great help and living conditions in our community. What is that strategy? And we all talk shows. We're doing our writing on Facebook. How do we get to point where we can change the dynamics of black culture?
I think it's going to be the young generation, the ones who did not have a graduation this year, who did not have a prom this year. I'm gonna be full disclosure. I'm a grandmother of a scholar athlete who graduated from with a 3.8
I just saw that. I saw that.
Oh, congratulations.
3.8 grade average. He hates for me to say it. He hates me to brag on him. From a very difficult public school in West Bloomfield. Public, not private, public school. Mm-hmm. While playing two sports for 3 years and gravitated to one sport, football, the final year, and still managed to be disciplined, never had an issue, nothing, and has a full scholarship to college. But he didn't have a graduation. He had to drive by, get a package, get in your car, and keep going. Here's your cap and gown, here's your diploma, here's your yearbook, nothing, So, we try to do our little thing. Our family did something for them and all. But these are the kids that are going to remember the sacrifice that they were forced to take. And I think these are our leaders. I'm an older person. I was trying to be Angela Davis back when I was in college. That was a long time ago. It's not up to me. I can still do what I can do. But we have to, one of the things we have not done, we have these leaders, black leaders. John Conyers is one of them. Who did he groom?
Yeah, that was problematic.
He groomed no one.
That was problematic.
Okay. Can I say something to you?
A lot of people. I'm wondering, did John Lewis groom anyone? I love John Lewis. Who are we grooming? We're so busy trying to hold on to our own little thing. Maybe we just don't feel like we have to groom. But we must groom people. We must mentor. We must do that because me, I'm getting too old. I'm going to be on the outside looking in. I want to see these young people, black, white, everybody. Because when we saw these protests around the world in countries that don't even have any black people, or not too many black people, white folks were out there, and I saw black people on Facebook saying, white people don't need to be getting into our business. This is our movement. What? Give me a break. Nothing will change until it's not just us pushing for it. We have to have decent human beings pushing for change.
Well, that's what helped push the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
We've been trying to do it on our own for a long time. And now that this has happened, George Floyd and others has happened, and we generated this worldwide thing, we can't let that just disappear. We have to keep that going. We have to keep it going. And young people, we saw these young people out there, getting shot up with rubber bullets, which we thought were not injurious, but they are. We've seen so much. So we want to wrap this up. What do you suggest, Michael, moving forward? What do you tell all of us, but particularly young people and parents, remember, all of us? What is our role? What do we need to do to keep this thing going so it doesn't just get lost as another moment in 2020?
Well, we need to study our history, one, because the conditions that we're dealing with and the problems we're dealing with today, dealing with police brutality and policing, things like this, et cetera, the racial disparities, racial inequities, that comes from a historical context. So we need to study our history, study politics, understand law. All this intersects, okay? Get involved in local organizations or national organizations that are doing what you feel needs to be done. You may get involved in protests, but you start paying more attention to local races, local politics, okay, because that impacts you as well as federal. And then we have to change our mindset as well. One of the things that's taking place right now is America many people are reevaluating our symbols, the Confederate monuments, things like this. That comes out of a historical context. I recommend that one of the things I recommend people read is the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. It's a 52-page study. They can download it from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, splcenter.org. And it documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And then it gives many recommendations on how to more correctly teach that history. But if we don't understand that foundational history, then we won't be able to change what emanates from that. Everything that we see around us.
Well, we are, we're just about the end, and I have a song that I want to play.
Go ahead.
We got 30 seconds. Keith.
In 1957, they did the Kerner Report, and it said, "Reach for a true society, one black, one white, separate, unequal call for expanded to the African American community in order to prevent further racial violence and polarization." We don't need a new report. All we got to do is go back to the Kerner Report and see what's happening. Black folks change. We'll never change. And we got to change us if we want a better society for us. And what I'm saying to you, we got to start to look at everything. We need to look at the black leadership, the church, the educational, and everything, and come up with a new strategy. And like Michael said, from a historical standpoint, we know what we have to do, but the question is, are we going to do it?
Well, it's we have a lot in front of us. Right. And I think it took so many tragedies, so many killings for a lot of us to wake up. We all knew, but we kind of accepted that's the way it has to be, that's the way it is. Let me go on with my life. But I think there are a lot of people, including myself, I just can't take it anymore. I mean, this is terrible. We got to do something. We got to speak up. We all have to be on the same page. We need to keep this thing going so that every day, whether it's a pancake mix box that somebody's name comes off, or
well, that ties into history, though. See, Nancy Green. Nancy Green portrayed Aunt Jemima, but that ties right into the history of slavery and the dehumanization of African Americans, which ties right to police brutality.
Absolutely. Look here, Michael. Yes. I haven't talked to you in so long.
I know. Thanks. And the Kerner Commission report is very important. Keep this correct.
Today, what's going on? I said, I got to call Michael. He has to be on the show, co-host with me tonight. And that's what we got to do. So look forward to hearing your show on Sunday.
Yep,
and
9 p.m.
Keith Williams, as always, stay on track. Keep doing what you're doing, because you do a great service to the Detroit community and the Michigan community, and keeping us informed of what's going on. So thank you both. Thank you both so much. And just want to say, until next week, good night and God bless.
All right, peace. All right.
You will not be.
All right, guys. All right, guys. Okay, so I was co-hosting the Mind Your Business show with Charlene Mitchell on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. The Kerner Commission report is extremely important. Okay. You've heard me talk about this before, the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. And it was commissioned July 28th, 1967 by President Lyndon Johnson to study the rebellions that were taking place all across this country. And we know that the summer 1967 was called the Long Hot Summer. And in 1957, we know there were 159 violent uprisings all across the country. But that Kerner Commission report, we need to revisit that. The report actually came out in March of 1968. And we know that 2018 was the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report. I've talked about this in the past couple of weeks. The Kerner Commission report, National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. And you can read about it at blackpast.org, blackpast.org. We may talk about it this Sunday. But what it did was it looked at three main things. When we look at the rebellions, they were looking at, number one, what actually happened. Number two, why did it happen? And number three, what can be done to prevent racial disturbances in the future? Okay. And that Keith is pretty correct when we say we don't have to do another study. We need to deal with the Kerner Commission report, because what they found was, so the Kerner Commission report surveyed 23 cities across the nation which experienced a racial rebellion. There were rebellions taking place the following year, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King's assassinated. 125 cities across the country had rebellions. You had the Detroit Rebellion in 1967. You had Newark, New Jersey in 67. You're going to have Watts, things like this, all taking place all across the country. They found that the racial disturbances were not the result of a single triggering event. They were not the result of a single triggering event, but that in all cities surveyed, African Americans experienced severe economic and social disadvantages compared to whites. Severe economic and social disadvantages compared to whites. Also, the report noted that the riots were not, or the rebellions were not, the result of any conspiracy. Rather, they were a response to what the report identified as the racial attitudes and behaviors of white Americans toward African Americans. The racial attitudes and behaviors of white Americans toward African Americans. So this is dealing with racism, and this is dealing with how other people see us. This ties right into imagery, because when we see the white controlled media and we see the images of African Americans depicted in the media, whether we talk about Aunt Jemima, whether we talk about the movie The Birth of a Nation, whether we talk about Amos and Andy, Little Rascals, all throughout history, okay? It deals with how Europeans in general see African Americans and want to depict African Americans. This ties into the history of the Confederate monuments. The Confederate monuments were largely erected not right after the Civil War ends in 1865, but two main periods of time, 1895 to 1915. 1895 is the year before Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case, which solidifies and legalizes separate but equal, the Jim Crow laws. And then 1915 is the second year of World War I, 1914 and 1918. And 1915 is the 50th anniversary of the Civil War ending, June 2nd, 1865. The 13th Amendment being adopted December 18th, 1865, which officially ends slavery, okay? The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And so you have the movie The Birth of a Nation that debuts February 8th, 1915. And this is going to cause race riots all across the country. And 1865 is also when the Ku Klux Klan was founded, December 24th, 1865, about a week after the 13th Amendment is adopted. So you have that period of time when you have these Confederate monuments being erected. And then you have the second period of time, we have the most number of monuments erected, which is from 1955 to 1970. So this is during the Civil Rights era. This was right after the year after Brown versus Board of Education, U.S. Supreme Court case of May 1954. And because of that Supreme Court case, which reverses Plessy versus Ferguson 1896, you're going to have a backlash to that. You're going to have Confederate monuments erected to terrorize African Americans and remind us of a low-level subservient position that many Europeans want us to have in society. Two, you're going to have a number of schools that are going to be renamed after Confederate heroes and Confederate soldiers. A lot of those schools originally were not named after Confederate soldiers or Confederate heroes. They're going to be renamed after Brown versus Board of Education as a way to resist and fight back against a civil rights movement. And then also you're going to have a huge increase in the number of vouchers that are going to be used to keep white schools segregated. Okay. And they're going to be given vouchers, school vouchers to low income white students. So they get those slots in the schools and they don't go to African-American students. Okay. So this history is deep. We have to understand this chronology of history and what happened and how events cause movements and things like this and backlashes to take place. Okay, so when we deal with and to understand racism, racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy, okay, for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival on a planet that's less than 10% European. This is what this is all about. Racism has nothing to do with not liking people. That's bigotry. Has nothing to do with calling people racial epithets. The racism is a power structure. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival. This is what this is all about, okay? This is why there were laws against white people intermixing with African Americans and intermarrying and things like this. And those laws were in general for African American men to keep them away from white women, because we know what white men were doing. They were in general. And the reason why is because you have to study the history of the African Moors in Europe from 711 AD to 1492, that 800-year, basically 800-year period of time. And you know, the Moors, you're still going to have some there, but they lose control of their last stronghold in Granada. January 2nd, 1492. Okay. When you study the history of the Moors in Europe, they're intermixing with Europeans, changing the complexion of many Europeans. Okay. All throughout Europe, this is taking place. And when we study the transatlantic slave trade, this is why it's so important to study a chronology of history. This is one of the problems with the 1619 Project from New York Times and Nicole Hannah-Jones. This is one of the problems with it. You got to study the hundreds of years of history prior to the transatlantic slave trade beginning, because the transatlantic slave trade is a continuation of the wars between the African Moors and Europeans that were taking place in Europe. And it is Europeans actually getting revenge on the African Moors for what happened in Europe. Okay, but you have to understand this chronology of history to understand this. This is why the book Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, is so important. Hold on. This is why Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, is so important. And also Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe by Runoko Rashidi. This deals with that history leading up to the transatlantic slave trade. All right. And what the Moors are taking into Europe, the science, the mathematics, the algebra, the chemistry, the periodic tables, things like this, and how all this is going to come back. They're taking in sugar. They're introducing sugar into Europe, introducing cotton. All these things are going to come back to kick us in the behind. Okay. When you look at, let me just show you something briefly here. When you look at this right here, the national flag of Sardinia, okay, Sardinia, Italy, with the 4 Moors heads on it. Okay, this is the national flag of Sardinia. When you look at the coat of arms of Pope Benedict XVI with the head of a Moorish king on it. Okay, when you go through Europe and you see the worship of the Black Madonna and Child, which comes from Osar, Osset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Isis and Horus, or Osset and Heru. The Black Madonna and child worship for hundreds of years all throughout Europe. They were worshiping the Black Madonna and child even before the Moors go in. Okay, that's the connection tying in the ancient Kemet in the Nile Valley region of Africa. All right, so we see that being worshipped in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and with Czechoslovakia also, Switzerland, Russia, Italy, all throughout. So you have to understand that history. You can't start in 1619. You can't start in 1441 with the Portuguese going into Mauritania, okay, picking up Africans and enslaving them. You can't start there. You have to understand this chronology of history. Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, one of my teachers, it says to understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcasting and Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. My YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. I was guest hosting I was co-hosting, I should say. I was co-hosting the Mind Your Business radio show tonight on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. The host is Charlene Mitchell. She's on Thursdays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF here in Detroit. I'm on every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network show. Okay. So I'm just here briefly after the show and talking about the Kerner Commission report. Also, if you'd like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN show, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. And then also all of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, so when we deal with the Kerner Commission report, you have to understand a chronology of history leading up to the Kerner Commission report in 1967. Okay, all this history is tied together. Historical events don't happen in a vacuum. They are the culmination of a sequence of historical events. And all this comes out of dealing with a history of understanding slavery and white supremacy and Jim Crow laws and things like this, and understanding racism, understanding a maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources in this country, which is historical. All right, so very briefly here, when we look at the Kerner Commission report, because this is something that really has to be revisited and really implemented. When you and a lot of people talk about reparations and things like that. I'm all for reparations, but I'm for making legal arguments for reparations. There's a whole nother conversation. A lot of these arguments are not legal arguments. Okay, period. A lot of these arguments are not legal arguments. They're moral arguments. You don't go to lawmakers arguing morality. You go to lawmakers arguing law. Reparations ain't gonna happen anytime soon. I'm telling you right now. That's long term. Implementing the Kerner Commission report is short term, because that report was done 52 years ago. Okay. So that's the other thing is we have to understand, we have to study the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is the foundation of law in this country. Okay. Go to loc.gov, the Library of Congress website, read the U.S. Constitution, or archives.gov. Okay. All right, because I don't have time to get deep into reparations, but that's long term. And how should I say this succinctly? Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution gives a legal foundation for reparations in this country, which is why March 2nd, 1807, the U.S. Congress outlawed the international transatlantic slave trade. That goes into effect January 1st, 1808. The U.S. Congress outlawed the importation of Africans into this country as slaves, and that goes into effect January 1st, 1808. But the reason why is because it was stipulated in Article 1, Section 9 of the Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, that the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade could be outlawed was January 1st, 1808. This is why this happens. At the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, 5 states had already abolished slavery, either fully abolished it like Vermont, July 2nd, 1777, or they abolished the international transatlantic slave trade, which means bringing Africans into this country, but you can still have slavery. You can still own slaves within the country and within that state and trade slaves, things like this. So, you know, Massachusetts and Connecticut and Vermont, they had already abolished slavery about 1787 when you had the Philadelphia Convention. And then all of the 13 colonies agreed to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade, except for South Carolina. South Carolina was the lone holdout. So they put a 20-year clause in the U.S. Constitution that the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade could be outlawed was January 1st, 1808. This is why this happens. So from January 1st, 1808 to June of about 1860, when the Clotilda comes into Alabama, all those Africans that were brought in, it was illegal based upon the federal government's own laws. Okay, so now you have a legal argument, not a moral argument, because those people who continue to bring Africans in this country, it was illegal based upon the government's own laws. Prior to that, slavery was legal. Prior to that, bringing Africans in was legal. One of the arguments that we're making is we're making a moral argument and not a legal argument. You go to lawmakers to argue law, not morality. So when we look at the Clotilda coming into this country, when you study the history of Clotilda in Alabama, the reason why it was illegal for that ship to come in, the owner of the ship knew it. And that's why those Africans, when they brought them in, they had to hide in the marsh, hide in the swamp for a few days. Okay, because you have U.S. ships out on the shores, out on the seaways, looking for slave ships. And this is why when you study the U.S. Supreme Court case of the Amistad 1841, that's a landmark Supreme Court case. People saw the movie Amistad in 1997, but we don't understand what we were seeing. The reason why those Africans, Joseph St. Q and the other Africans on the Amistad slave ship, the reason why they were set free, that was a U.S. Supreme Court case. The reason why they were set free is because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal for them to be captured because it violated the existing treaties at the time, like the Anglo-Spanish treaties of like 1835, 1817. And it was illegal for that ship to come into U.S. waters because the international transatlantic slave trade had been abolished by the U.S. Congress March 2nd, 1807, and it went into effect January 1st, 1808. So when that Amistad ship comes into U.S. waters, 1841, it's illegal. This is a U.S. Supreme Court case. If you go to archives.gov and search for the Amistad, they have some of the original court documents there, because I've gone to research that case. I've gone to research that case there. And one of the first things they tell you is that it was illegal. It violated the existing treaties at the time for that ship for them to be captured. Okay, they captured in Sierra Leone. It violated the existing treaties at the time for them to be captured, and it was illegal for the ship to come into the U.S. waters. See, this is the difference between making a moral argument, like we worked for free for 246 years. Okay, so when we built this country, we want reparations. That's the difference between making a moral argument and a legal argument. We have to study history and law and learn how to make legal arguments, not moral arguments. The fact of the matter is, it was legal not to pay slaves. That's the whole purpose of enslaving them. It was legal to own slaves and not pay them. That's the whole purpose of enslaving them. How you going to argue you didn't get paid? What the hell did you read that slaves were supposed to be paid? I mean, what are you talking about? It was morally wrong. We know that. You don't go to lawmakers arguing morality. You go arguing law. Does this directly impact the economic conditions of African Americans today? Absolutely. But we have to deal with law, and we don't understand law or history, and they intersect. They're connected. All this is right at archives.gov, the official website of the National Archives. That's a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, the Amistad case, 1841. But we don't study this stuff. We don't do this type of research. Okay, so back to the Kerner Commission report. 3 questions that President Johnson wanted the commission to address. 1, what happened? 2, why did it happen? 3, what can be done to prevent racial disturbances in the future? So in order to answer these questions, the commission surveyed 23 cities across the nation which experienced a racial rebellion. they found that the racial disturbances were not the result of a single triggering event, but that in all cities surveyed, 23 cities, African Americans experienced severe economic and social disadvantages compared to whites. Also, the report noted that the riots were not the result of any conspiracy. Rather, they were a response to what the report identified as the racial attitudes and behaviors of white Americans toward African Americans. Now, in responding to why the rebellions occurred, the Kerner report pointed to African Americans' frustration and feelings of powerlessness regarding extremely high rates of unemployment and underemployment, poverty, police brutality, and inadequate public services. The report continued that a largely poor African American population was confined to the central cities, while a predominantly white population moved out. That's white flight. They're moving out to the newly formed suburbs. Okay, which goes back to the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts of 1952 and 1956 that drive 41,000 miles of interstate highway all across the country, and it runs through about 1,600 African-American communities. People should read this book here, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. This is the third edition. Also, you can read, Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson is one of my teachers. I know him personally. Some of you have seen interviews I've done with him. You can read Powernomics and Black Labor White Wealth. Some of the information in Powernomics is a little outdated. Some things can be updated. You don't have to take everything 100%. You can take some of it and adapt it to what's going on right now. And he has, some of what he talks about is more theory. Some is actual practical application. Some of it is more theory to get us to think beyond the circumference of our own awareness, etc. I know Dr. Claude Anderson personally. I called him last week, I think it was, because he's under the weather some. So I wanted to reach out to him, see how he's doing, and set up an interview with him. Because I told him, when I talked to him a few months ago, I told him I'll bring him on soon to do an interview. But okay, so answering what can be done to prevent the rebellions in the future, the Kerner Commission report suggested that the federal government intervene to improve housing for African Americans, education, employment opportunities, and social services for African Americans. Housing, education, employment, and social services for African Americans. Also, the Kerner Commission report suggested that the federal government dismantle discriminatory practices in education, discriminatory practices in employment, and then also dismantle discriminatory practices dealing with the police force and criminal court systems, or we can say the criminal justice system dealing with police, dealing with courts, dealing with the prison system, all that criminal justice system. Okay. So keep in mind, this is all taking place during the Vietnam War. And President Johnson is distracted. His attention is distracted by the Vietnam War. Okay. President Johnson accepted the report, but did not support the conclusions, and minimal efforts were made to address the problems identified by the commission. This Kerner Commission report needs to be revisited, updated, and implemented. Because what is taking place right now in the conditions of African Americans right now, it goes right back to the Kerner Commission report and what they laid out and how those issues were not addressed. May of 1967, Dr. King was interviewed by NBC News for 26 minutes. The interview is on YouTube. They digitally remastered it about 3 years ago in 2017 and re-released it. And it's called Beyond Civil Rights, Black Power, something like that. Beyond Civil Rights, Black Power. And Dr. King talks about the fight for economics, different things like this. But one of the things he also talks about is how because of the Vietnam War that's taking place, and because you got to remember, back in '67, they didn't have cable TV. You only had 3 networks: ABC, CBS, NBC. And he talked about how it was hard to get issues pertaining to civil rights on the front page of the newspaper or get good coverage in the media because so much attention was going to the Vietnam War. Okay. This is something else that's taking place at this time. So in 2017 or 2018, when the 50th anniversary of the actual report came out in March of 1968. So there was some talk around the 50th anniversary of it and revisiting it. I think more attention should have been given to the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report. WashingtonPost.com has an article, report, no progress for African Americans on home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration in 50 years. No progress for African Americans on home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration in 50 years. And it's important to read. I think the titles are a little misleading because we see the incarceration rate of African Americans go up and come down, because in 2016, we saw the Pew Research has information on this. You can look at the incarceration rates at Pew Research. 2016 going into 2017, the percentage of 2016 percentage of African Americans in prison dropped from dropped from like 38%. That dropped from 40% to 34%, and we know that the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years in December 2015. Department of Justice has a study that talks about that. Newsweek.com has an article dealing with that, how the because the U.S. prison population dropped each year from 2008 to 2016. And it drops to its lowest point in 20 years in December 2015. Newsweek.com has an article dealing with the prison population at about 1.5 million. In that article came out in like December 2016. I'll pull it up and post it here. So, because a lot of people don't know this, I'll give you the actual name of the article. So, and one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that the war on drugs was winding down under the Obama administration. We'll talk about this some on the Sunday night show. I've dealt with this the few previous Sundays. But when Trump signed that little executive order that he did that was weak, dealing with police reform, which is really not a police reform executive order, it's just for show. When he lied and said that the Obama administration didn't do anything about police reform and police brutality, things like that, that's a lie. Trump knows it's a lie because he dismantled a lot of what the Obama administration did. Okay, and I posted articles dealing with that. The Trump and his attorney generals backed off of doing investigations to the patterns and practices of the police departments. And to make a long story short here, this is why a lot of police unions supported Trump. When Jeff Sessions, Trump's first attorney general, is a real hardliner when it comes to law and order. And law and order was one of Trump's platforms when he ran in 2016. And it's one of his platforms now, law and order. And he said in 2016, he wants to be the law and order president. That's a throwback to Richard Nixon in 1968. When Richard Nixon ran for president in 68, Nixon was a backlash to the rebellions that were taking place that the Kerner Commission was examining. Okay. Because you remember in 68, President Johnson didn't run again for president. Right. Nixon is a backlash to the rebellions that are taking place across the country, African Americans are having. He's a backlash to the Black Panther Party for self-defense, a backlash to the Civil Rights Movement, a backlash to affirmative action. September 1965 was the executive order signed by President Lyndon Johnson, Executive Order 11246, which is known as affirmative action. Okay. Nixon is a backlash to all that, and he runs on the platform of law and order. Then June 17th, 1971, and we just commemorated the anniversary of Nixon declaring his war on drugs in front of the U.S. Congress, because he's trying to get an increase in funding to fund his war on drugs. That was June 17th, 1971. And it's going to be the early 1970s that you see the U.S. prison population increasing. There wasn't a crime bill in 94. No, the U.S. prison population quadruples from 1970 to 1993. That goes back to Nixon's war on drugs that very few people talk about because they haven't studied the history. So all this ties into history and law and politics. But if we look at this article from the Washington Post, 50 years after the historic Kerner Commission identified white racism as the key cause of pervasive discrimination in employment, education, and housing, there has been no progress in how African Americans fare in comparison to whites when it comes to home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration, according to a report released Monday by the Economic Policy Institute. We know that the home ownership rate for African Americans is about 44%. It's about 74% or something like that for white Americans. And this is something that's being exposed right now, because if you saw my Sunday night show, the June 14th edition of the African History Network show, I talked about how we're going to see a huge increase in the number of evictions due to coronavirus, tied into coronavirus. After the moratoriums on evictions expire in various states, and we're going to see end of July the extra $600 a month from the federal government. We're going to see that run out, that it expire. There's going to be a massive amount of evictions that are going to happen. Political.com had an article dealing with this. I talked about it on my Sunday night show. Black community braces for next threat, mass evictions. Black community braces for next threat, mass evictions. And one of the things that this article, this is from Politico.com, Politico, Politico.com. One of the things it talks about is that for white people, their home ownership rate is 74%, compared to African Americans at 44% and Hispanics at 49%. And African American and Latino households also pay a higher share of their income on rent in most major metropolitan areas. And because we're less likely to own our own homes, it exposes us more to being evicted from rental property, okay, due to severe economic conditions tied to COVID-19. And the other thing is expected that about between 45% to 50% of African American, 45% to 50% of African American owned businesses are not going to survive the coronavirus economy. Blackenterprise.com has an article dealing with this. So all of this is tied together. Okay. All of this is tied together. All right. So read this article from WashingtonPost.com dealing with Kerner Commission report, study that. AtlantaBlackStar.com also had an article 50 years later. Kerner report on racial inequality is more relevant and unaddressed than ever. The article from Newsweek.com, the U.S. prison population exceeded 1.5 million in 2015. The U.S. prison population exceeded 1.5 million in 2015. That's the article from Newsweek.com. Okay, so we'll post that as well. Let's see here. And we know that rebellions were taking place all across the country, including Detroit as well. Okay, July 23rd, 1967. The rebellion here in Detroit also. Okay. All right, so everybody be sure to listen to my Sunday night show, the African History Network show. We broadcast on 9, 10 a.m. Superstation WFDF, but we also broadcast on my social media platforms and right here on Facebook, the African History Network, the African History Network on Facebook, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. So we're on Sunday nights. And then also you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, through PayPal as well. Okay. And follow me on Facebook and YouTube. Turn on notifications also so you know when I go live. And you can sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter also. Okay. All right, so look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.